Hey, FreightPod listeners. Before we get started today, let's do a quick shout out to our sponsor, Rapido Solutions Group. Rapido connects logistics and supply chain organizations in North America with the best nearshore talent to scale efficiently and deliver superior customer service. Rapido works with businesses from all sides of the logistics industry. This includes brokers, carriers, and logistics software companies. Rapido builds out teams with roles across customer and carrier sales and support, back office administration, and technology services. The team at Rapido knows logistics and people. It's what sets them apart. Rapido is driven by an inside knowledge of how to recruit, hire, and train within the industry, and a passion to build better solutions for success. The team is led by CEO Danny Frisco and COO Roberto Acaza, two guys I've worked with from my earliest days in the industry at Coyote. I have a long history with them and I trust them. I've even been a customer of theirs at Molo, and let me tell you, they made our business better. In the current market where everyone's trying to do more with less and save money, solutions like Rapido are a great place to start. To learn more, check them out at gorapido.com. That's gorapido.com. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Freight Pod. I'm your host, Andrew Silver. I am joined today. We are in the deep dive of AI. I've got another tech startup in the space. This one founded by a gentleman who has some industry experience, some very interesting experience. My guest today is Mr. Paul Singer, the CEO and co-founder of FleetWorks. Paul, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you for having me.
Of course. It's you're in an interesting space, this voice AI stuff. It's seemingly every week we learn something new that's, I don't know, maybe game changing. Let's start with the DeepSeek stuff.
Yeah.
Like, as somebody who actually understands what's going on with all this, give me your kind of understanding of what the world just went through with DeepSeek announcing that it had created what it did on such minimal funding, whether that's true or false. I'm just curious your thoughts there before we get into your story.
Yeah, I don't know if people have actually looked into like how verified those claims are. It seems to be true. Yeah, I mean, for context on folks who haven't seen this, so a Chinese hedge fund that had sort of an AI research department basically created a really high-end, what we call a reasoning model, with far fewer resources than OpenAI, Anthropic, or any of the sort of big foundational AI companies. So typically, it costs hundreds of millions of dollars to train these models. DeepSeek claims to have done it with, I think they said $6 million. So super impactful for NVIDIA, because every investor assumed that NVIDIA is just going to have infinite demand with sort of these AI companies training their models. Turns out, DeepSeek did it basically with just a few sort of lower end chips. And so the implications for kind of the whole infrastructure of AI is huge, obviously. Implication for OpenAI, Anthropic is really big. I have friends who work at all those companies, and there's certainly a kind of a moment of reckoning for all these companies. They're like, wow, like we aren't as protected as we thought. For companies like us, who we sort of are the application layer on top of AI, it's really exciting. So typically for us, we sort of need to assess what is the right model to use for any given task. And so we'll use open source models that we kind of fine tune for our own use cases. We'll use sort of foundational models for some parts of our product. We haven't yet used these reasoning models because number one, they're a little bit slow. They're like designed to be a little bit slower, but they're also really expensive. And so DeepSeek basically takes that whole expensive thing out of the equation. Like, I think the numbers I've seen is it's 97% cheaper than using OpenAI's reasoning model.
Can you explain the difference between, you mentioned slowness, but like the difference between what you'd get from a reasoning model versus what you're using?
Yeah, absolutely. So a reasoning model basically has built in what we call, or what's called chain of thought reasoning. And so Basically when you submit a prompt or you submit a request for an AI, and a lot of folks who are listening are probably have already used ChatGPT. So you see ChatGPT kind of thinking out loud how it works. And so a reasoning model kind of just does that 10x. So it's going to really spend a lot of time going through every possible avenue before it outputs a result. So the results tend to be a lot more accurate. But the downside is that it can, cost a lot of time. And, since we do a lot of things on phone, email, text message, real-time communication, it's not a great application for what we do today. I think given the way that this tech is advancing, maybe in a year or two, we'll be able to use reasoning models in these sort of dynamic use cases.
Got it. Okay. And what do you see as the overarching impact? Is this a foundational moment? Is this DeepSeek announcement a foundational moment in AI? And I know you're going to be somewhat guessing, or at least it's an educated expectation or guess, but
yep.
Is this a foundational moment? And if so, what do you see as the long-term impact to the open AIs of the world who have invested billions and maybe disrupted by a much cheaper alternative?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I kind of view this more like a COVID moment for AI, where I think COVID really accelerated digital adoption for a lot of things, right? Every digital platform did really well in COVID. And then so the rate of growth really accelerated, and then it sort of normalized back to what it was pre-COVID. But COVID kind of accelerated adoption of digital things, whether it be like a Toast terminal at like a local restaurant that you go to, or like using Airbnb versus like calling a hotel to book a booking, for example. So just accelerated digital adoption. I don't think this is anything new though. Like frankly, what we do see every year in foundational AI models is we do see step change improvements. So I think this is more of a COVID moment where the step change was quicker than people anticipated. But the way that we're all modeling these improvements is that it's just going to continue to really, if not linearly, maybe even exponentially improve these models.
And last question here before we're going to get into your background, and then we'll go through the whole linear story. How, as a CEO of a up-and-coming AI business, do you factor in these types of step change improvements that can even be exponential? How do you factor that into your own product development and kind of company evolution? How do you take that into account?
Yeah. It's a good question. We think about it in a couple of ways. So with these foundational models, I would kind of think about them on three different axes, basically. So there's speed, there's power, and there's cost. And with all these models, and probably in perpetuity, there's some trade-off to be made between speed, power, and cost. Like we talked about reasoning models being really powerful and more expensive, and DeepSeek sort of changes that dynamic. But for sure, they're slower, right? Versus you have these mini models that are cheaper, faster, and way less powerful. And so we, as a startup that's like really building on top of this ever evolving space, I would say we're pretty consistently evaluating what's the right trade-off to make at any given time, given the advances in those foundational technologies. Ultimately, I think we've found the right balance for now. But essentially what's going to happen is we're going to keep upgrading our foundational models, and they're going to be more powerful. Like, for example, like as we think about carrier negotiation, today we do a lot of guiding of the AI to make sure that's really successful. But in the future, the AI might be able to do that more autonomously for the same or even cheaper cost today. So basically, we just assume that all the foundational models will get cheaper, more powerful, and faster. I would say every 9 months is probably the right cadence.
And is it easy to, sorry, I'm going to stay on this for a second, but is it easy to let's say you're using Model X and Model Y comes out. It's a different company, whole different thing, and you just look at it and say, this is better than what we're using today. How easy is it to just pick up your product off of Model X and dump it on Model Y, and then you're just off and running?
At a high level, it's super easy. Like it's basically just changing an API key. I think this is kind of getting a little bit more detailed about like what we do, but customers trust FleetWorks to be their front of house. Like freight brokers, when they use FleetWorks, are saying, I'm going to trust FleetWorks to talk to my carriers, which is one of the most important things that we do as a brokerage. So it would be, I think, foolish of us if we were to just say, we're going to swap from OpenAI to Anthropic or OpenAI to DeepSeek, because while switching is super easy, there might be some unintended consequences because all these models perform slightly differently. So if we were to do that, we have rigorous testing in place to make sure that when we make a model change, that it's passing all the criteria that we would expect. So we're not like creating bad experiences for carriers and brokers.
What's an example of an unintended consequence that could come up if you didn't do it right? I'm not saying this has happened to you. I'm just curious.
Totally. There's probably dozens. One really easy example would be, I think around like what we call hallucination rate. So the AI's propensity to make up answers to things. We've done a lot of things on our side to reduce and eliminate hallucination rate. But one great example would be carrier calls you about an available load. Let's say they're a dedicated carrier. They say, hey, I run this lane regularly for you. Can you just send this over? Do you still have that load on for Monday? Dallas to Chattanooga. I'll do it for $1,000 like usual. And the AI says, instead of saying yes, I'll send over right now, it says, oh no, we need 900 on this one, right? That could be an unintended consequence where you want to honor that rate on file with the carrier, but because you swapped the model and because you don't know how it's going to perform, maybe it's going to do some weird things for you. So those are the kinds of things that we test for whenever we think about a change.
And that's an example of a hallucination rate where the history and guidance provided in the model is for it should know that Dallas to Chattanooga has been run by this carrier 8 times for $1,000.
Yep.
It's an approved rate in our process.
Sure.
And it will just hallucinate the idea that it should try to get cheaper and then go for 900.
That's one great example. I think another one could be like appointment times. So carrier says, hey, like this load's supposed to pick up at noon. Any chance we could shift it over to 2 p.m.? Sometimes we know we can. Sometimes we don't know. The last thing we want to do is tell the carrier, yes, we can, when we're not sure, right? So that's just another example of how we prevent hallucinations. To something that we're pretty careful about.
Interesting. How do you catch the hallucinations happening? Because that's not a super crazy situation. If I look at a brokerage without FleetWorks or any tool like this, that type of conversation, whether it's a mistake or the right answer, is happening all day, where the carrier's asking for a rate or the broker's responding with an approval or not enough. And how do you even notice that those are hallucinations?
Yeah. We could kind of get really deep into this, but I think AI totally changes how you build companies. So typically when you build technology, you have really rigid what's called test cases, like basically like a source of truth. Like if we expect if X happens, it should always end up as Y. And so the cool thing that AI enables you to do is actually have your test cases be a lot more fluid, which means you can create hundreds of thousands of test cases. So we're constantly on every single call that we're running, and every single email, every single piece of communication, we run test cases against those. And so we have basically AI evaluating AI. So we'll run the call or run the email through another AI and says, this was good for 1, 2, 3 reasons, or this was bad for XYZ reasons. Therefore, you should go and change the original model. So that's how we think about kind of the AI self-learning and the AI self-evaluating.
But even in those examples, is there not a person who has to tell the AI this is good, or the AI is capable of, like, at some point there's a person who's got to be giving the input of yes or no, good or bad, right?
Yeah, we build the test cases. So we build the test cases and then we let the AI run at it.
Okay, got it. Understood. All right, now let's go back. So I appreciate you kind of, I don't know, this conversation could go deep into AI for a number of reasons. So
I'm down.
When did AI come onto your radar?
Yeah. So I was at Uber Freight from 2018 to 2022. When I left Uber, GPT, I think it was GPT-3 had just come out, or basically ChatGPT had just launched. And the technology was super simple. Like you could, or at least the outcomes were simple. You could give it like an email and you would tell it, hey, make this more professional or make this funny or write me a joke, right? And there was none of the infrastructure built to be able to build what we have today. So I started playing around with it, and I would be lying if I said that we had this idea at the time. Like we were just playing around with AI. At the time, I was building a carrier-facing product. We thought that there could be sort of a better driver workforce management product for carriers, because drivers are churning all the time. They don't have good visibility on what their pay looks like. So we were building in that space. It was a total flop. It was like a really bad idea. Frankly, like after talking with probably 300 drivers over the course of 3 months, we're like, drivers don't actually care and they're fine with how things are. So we went back to the drawing board, and I would say it was about a year and a half ago, where you could build a viable voice AI agent. Barely viable, I would say. So we were, my co-founder and I, we were playing around with various ideas. I remembered back in my time at Uber that despite our app, we had built, we built this app, carriers were using it, we were getting a ton of bookings through it, but still about a quarter of our bookings were done off of call-ins, DAT call-ins. And so I was like, hey, like if we could build a voice AI agent to at least like screen the carrier and share the details of the load, that could be pretty helpful for a lot of brokerages. So we built a pretty scrappy prototype. We found a load board that let anybody sign up and post loads. And we signed up for that load board and posted just one load that we knew would generate a bunch of interest. And this was like straight up one of the worst products we'd ever built. Like it was janky, the lag was bad, the voice quality was bad. Like it was nothing like what we have today. And I remember we got 3 carrier calls, and on 2 of them, the carrier knew they were talking to an AI, and they still went through the whole call. And on one of them, the carrier didn't even know they're talking to an AI and negotiated. And after that, those 3 calls, like we kind of looked at each other. We're like, this is real. Like with this product that we built that is bad on every dimension, it's working. Because we were first in the space, it was such a big arc to convince people that, hey, like this thing actually works. Like carriers are down for this. And I remember we had a conversation a while back of like, hey, do you care? Like, what do carriers even think about this? And I mean, I think we wouldn't even have a company if carriers didn't mind the process. I think ever since those 3 calls, we've really just been off to the races. And what's been cool is, as we've kind of talked about, is the underlying technology has just gotten better, faster than anyone thought. And so what we can do for our customers has just continued to expand over the last, year and change since we launched the product.
Who's we?
We is an ever-changing definition, but so my co-founder and I met through mutual friends in New York. His name is Quang. He used to lead the experimental engineering team at Airbnb, and it's been a great partnership. I mean, I think I feel very blessed, first of all, just to be working with him. And then I think it's just a well-known secret that good talent attracts good talent. And so we've got 8 more people in San Francisco, a few more people remote. Every technical person on the team is either Quang, a current founder, or a former founder. So everyone on the team is a former CTO. You got myself. You have a couple
Everyone
go-to-market.
on the team is a former CTO of a business?
Yes.
That's wild. So
Yeah.
of 10 people, 10 people are all former CTOs essentially?
Yeah, we have 7 technical people and seven
Seven?
CTOs. Yeah.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah.
And so what was the timeline of when you built this product and made 3 calls on a load board?
How long did it take us to do those first 3?
When was that?
When was this? This would have been summer 2023. So call it like a year and a half ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
And interesting anecdote. You mentioned that, so you worked at Uber for 5 years. We should talk a little bit about that. And maybe let's do that now to get that out of the way. How did you get to Uber? What was you were trying to work in freight, or, you just saw the cool Uber name?
Yeah.
What was the story there?
I knew literally nothing about freight like 7 years ago. Like I was like, what kind of introduced me. So I started my career in management consulting, which was great training ground, but generally I would not recommend it. I think if you're someone that wants to start in management consulting, if you're someone who's like, let's say 20, 21, 22 listening to this podcast, I would recommend that if you're someone who thinks you're a hustler and you want to be analytical, go learn a little bit of SQL, go learn a little bit of data analysis, and cold email 30 startup CEOs and say, hey, I will do anything for you. And I bet you like 20 out of 30 are going to respond, and you'll probably get an interview with at least half of them. So I'd really recommend that just career path as an aside. So I did consulting for a couple of years, met some really smart people, learned a lot of stuff, but did 2 things that kind of elevated me to Uber Freight. So first was I did a consulting case on industrial metal doors. This was back in 2017. Turns out the industrial metal doors industry is fascinating. There's like 3 companies. 2 of them are private equity owned. One of them, every PE company wants to own, but the guy refuses to sell. So it's like a funny, like a little dynamic in this niche space. And unsurprisingly, the biggest part of the industrial doors market is warehousing, right? Like every warehouse needs whatever, dozens of doors. And so I was like, this is interesting. Like I grew up in suburban Connecticut. Like hadn't seen a warehouse at that point. And then a couple months, so I was like, okay, like, so trucking is big, warehousing is big. That's cool. I didn't really think that much about it. Then a couple months later, the partners of LEK came to me and said, hey, we're writing a white paper on Uber Freight. Uber Freight had just launched maybe 6 months earlier. Do you want to help us kind of do research for the white paper? And, I was sort of between projects at the time. We call that kind of being on the beach, and you kind of just help the partners with research and development. So like, sure.
I thought it was called being on the bench. Is being on the beach?
Being on the beach, yeah.
I thought it was on the bench.
No, it's being on the beach. It's kind of a reward for a lot of hard work. Like once you're like on a project for like 4 months, they're like, you get to go to the beach for like a week, right?
Yeah, got it.
So I was beached, and I was doing this research, and I was like, this is crazy. Like Uber rides was at the time still exploding, growing like double-digit percentage year over year, off of like tens of billions of dollars. And Uber Freight was starting from nothing. At that point, they were maybe like 100 loads a day, 200 loads a day. And our thesis was that Uber Freight would not grow as quickly as Uber Rides, which we got right, but the reason why we got wrong. So we thought that because the industry is slower to adopt technology, which I think was wrong. And the industry is actually pretty quick at adopting technology, if it makes sense.
If they want to, yeah.
Right, yeah. If the ROI is there. They were like, oh, we thought that because the industry is slow at adopting tech, Uber Rides or Uber Freight's not going to grow as fast as Uber Rides. So it did not grow as fast, but the reason is because Uber Freight ultimately was providing a somewhat commoditized service to shippers. And no shipper is incentivized to give any single brokerage all or most of their wallet share, right? So Uber Freight's thesis was, hey, we can procure carriers for less, therefore we're going to win more freight from shippers. I don't think that thesis proved to be true, and I think Uber buying Transplace was a great move on their part, because ultimately that is kind of how you tap into that shipper wallet share in a different way. Ultimately, my experience at Uber Freight was just amazing. I mean, super smart people, really passionate. I think Uber did a great job of bringing in talent who otherwise might not have worked in logistics. And you've seen now so many startups come out of Uber Freight, us being one of them. You've got Loop, you've got Truck Smarter, you have a bunch of others as well. So really, really great group of people, and I wouldn't trade that experience for anything.
What would you say have been the best takeaways you've had from that experience or learnings from the 4 to 5 years you spent at that business?
Yeah. I think there's some personal stuff and there's some professional stuff. So on the personal side of things, like I very quickly was like, holy shit, this industry is crazy. Like I was just blown away by the amount of problems. So like my first project was the ELD mandate had kind of just gone into effect. That was my first project. And I was supposed to come up with a strategy for how we were going to engage with the ELD providers and the ELD aggregators. So we built that strategy and we executed on it. We ended up partnering with Samsara, Keep Trucking, P44, MacroPoint, like all the big players. I really loved building and working with small carriers. Like for me, that's what kept me motivated, and that's what kept a lot of people at Uber Freight really motivated. I had the personal phone numbers of probably a dozen carriers. We would talk regularly every single week. And it was really because of that experience that I got the chance to go from operations to strategy to product and ultimately lead a big chunk of the carrier product team. I just love building products for carriers. Like I think like empowering those guys who, as a tangent, like fraud is a really hot topic right now. Everyone is really concerned about fraud, as they should be. I really personally think it's still important to remember that, hey, like 99% of carriers out there are pretty honest, hardworking people who just want to provide good service. And so for me, what gets me excited even today at FleetWorks is how do we help those people make more money? How do we empower those people? How do we continue to be a carrier first company? I think that's what Uber Freight instilled really well personally for me. It's just felt like, Uber gets a lot of knocks, but internally, I will say that every decision we made was through the lens of how can we create a great carrier experience? Because that was our differentiator. That's how we got so many carriers, was carriers liked the Uber Freight app. Like they really did.
Yeah, that's great. What would you say on the flip side were like the biggest misses or biggest challenges that you endured or noticed while there, or why you think it didn't maybe reach a level that it might have wanted to?
Yeah. We spent a lot of time thinking about that, and that's kind of some of the foundation for, I think, why FleetWorks should really exist, to be honest. I think it's really hard to digitize freight through digital channels. And what I mean by that is like when you have an application, when you have like a website, or when you have a mobile app, you can very quickly get a lot of demand for that, as Uber does, right? Like, I mean, at this point, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of drivers are sessioning in the Uber app every single month. The problem is those guys aren't very sticky. They tend to treat Uber Freight just like they might any other broker, or just like they might DAT, right? It's just a transactional place to get freight. I think where Uber kind of missed the ball is sort of two pieces. Number one is the carrier relationship. Like, how do I understand at a really deep level who this carrier is, where they like to run, like what makes that carrier tick, and like how can I make that carrier successful? I think a great carrier rep, a great individual rep can do that, but they're sort of limited by just the amount of neurons in their brain and the amount of time that they have in a day. Like me, when I started on the carrier floor, and I was only there very briefly, like you can maybe keep 10 or 20 relationships in your mind, right? Or in a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard to scale beyond that. So I think that was one miss, is Uber thought they could scale that relationship and they never really invested in it. And then number two was that this is a little counterintuitive, but it's obvious if you've been at brokerage. Uber did really well on short haul freight. Your intrastate Texas, intrastate California, regional Southeast, Uber crushed those lanes, and Uber outperformed a lot of brokers on those lanes. But as you know, those are not good paying loads. Like, you might get $200 on that load, and Uber might beat out like some mom and pop brokerage, beat them by $10, but Uber's making $30 of margin on these $200 loads. And suddenly when you add any operations into that gross margin equation, Uber's just losing money on that freight, right? And so where a lot of brokers tend to go is they build density with short haul, but then they invest a lot in this long haul freight where it's high margin, high top line, but a little bit higher touch, higher service, really hard to cover through what I'll call digital channels. And so they rely on phone and email and text message and WhatsApp and Google Chat and all these ways to procure capacity that Uber just wasn't going to invest in. And so Uber was really bad at long haul freight and really, really good at short haul freight. So they kind of started to do a lot more short haul freight, and it was sort of this weird negative selection problem where they weren't able to really optimize that long haul freight that's going to drive most of the margin for the business.
So just an interesting thought I had listening to that. There was a point when Convoy went under that I was, I guess, arguing with my old co-founder, Matt Vogrich, about Convoy. And what I was saying that I had heard was that Convoy had secured like exceptional automation on and higher than industry average margin percent on some of these dedicated lanes. And the higher than industry average margin percent was throwing me for a loop, and throwing both of us for a loop, where he was just like, I don't believe it. I think that's just a lie. And I was like, I think it's actually true. But the only way it makes sense is if they were really good and really heavy on short haul lanes that were like $200 a load, and you could be at $30 or $40 a load in margin, which does not cover your cost. It's not enough money, but on a margin percent, it looks really good. 15%, 17%, 18%, whatever it may be. It sounds like Uber, in some respects, was in a similar situation.
Exactly. And it makes total sense when you think about like Uber rides, like, right? Like if you go to New York City and you call an Uber, it's a 4-minute wait time, right? Like the marketplace is really dense, it's really good, and things tend to be really efficient. Let's say you go to, I don't know, Birmingham, Alabama, right? Like small city, you call an Uber, it could be 20 minutes away. Like the marketplace just gets worse and worse the less dense it is. And so it totally makes sense why a mobile app based brokerage would suffer similar problems as Uber rides.
Yeah, I made this analogy, I think, talking to another AI business, and just the idea that the marketplace freight matching concept, it doesn't work if you think about it like a Tinder, in that Tinder's job would be to match all of the people with all of the people. Tinder and Hinge or whatever, they're good at getting some people matched and then those people are gone. But if your job, like your job is as a brokerage, is to execute every order I've taken from a customer, which means that in the Tinder analogy, Tinder's only successful if they match everybody. And the reality is some people don't have a lot of matches.
Yep.
And whatever the reasons are, doesn't matter. But there are reasons like loads. If a load is really ugly, it's not getting matched easily. No one's showing up and wanting to take it,
right?
Unless you start offering to pay asinine amounts of money. So I don't know. I just think that's interesting. We don't have to go much further on that, other than, I guess, to talk a little bit about kind of your takeaway in starting FleetWorks. One of the comments you made earlier was that Uber still had something like up to a quarter of its loads being covered by call-ins from boards like the DAT, which validates a point that I've made before, which is nearly every brokerage still has to use load boards. And, shippers don't like to hear that, but it's a reality. And just because you use a load board doesn't mean that's a bad thing. I think that it's all about what you do with the carriers that call you. And it's what is your strategy? If your strategy is to simply post and pray and rely entirely on the load board and hope you find good carriers, that's not a good strategy. If you use it as one place where you are getting visibility of your freight out to the masses, and then once the masses call into you or email you or you talk to them, however you get in touch with them, if you then vet them appropriately and develop the right relationships with them and set the right expectations with them, you can have a very successful partnership that allows you to service your customers. But I just think it's interesting, like the company that's invested hundreds of millions of dollars into creating a carrier marketplace so they could not have to use load boards, still has to use load boards, which segues, I think, nicely into the idea of FleetWorks, right?
I agree. Yeah. I think ultimately, like freight is so interesting because there is no single market clearing marketplace. DAT is probably the closest that we have, but I don't think it is. It's obviously not the single marketplace, right? Like there's a lot of freight not booked on DAT. It is a good segue into us and why we should exist. So, if folks haven't heard about us, so FleetWorks.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead and explain what this is. I was going to ask, and I just didn't. I went to take a drink, but
it's all good.
Tell us what is FleetWorks?
Yeah. So we're a lot of things. FleetWorks uses AI to connect carriers and brokers. What that means is when a carrier calls you off of DAT, FleetWorks can answer that call. We can vet the carrier through our partnerships, whether that be Highway, RMIS, My Carrier Packet, or My Carrier Portal. We can describe the load to the carrier, including all the way down to the special instructions and the expectation setting of the load. And then we can negotiate on price, and depending on what our customer wants, we can actually go all the way to booking the carrier on the load. That's our core product today. That's where all of our customers are finding, no joke, 10x ROI just from a operating cost standpoint. So there's 10x ROI with FleetWorks just on that product. Because we've built this.
Can you clarify something?
Yeah.
Sorry. You mentioned at the start of that answer for what FleetWorks is, you mentioned when a carrier calls you in off DAT. I'm pretty sure, and just want to confirm, you are not connected to DAT in that it has to be a call in off DAT. It
Correct.
can just be connected to your company call line. Anyone who calls into the company could be answered by a FleetWorks AI agent, correct?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So when a carrier calls you, whether it be DAT, another load board, or even just your general line, we can answer that call for you. Customers also use us to make outbound calls to carriers, whether it be to offer available loads, like, hey, I've got this carrier in my routing guide. Let's go offer it to those carriers first before we put it out publicly on the load boards, right? Like, how do we encourage more relationship building? And customers, of course, are going to be using us for track and trace. So, carriers, for various reasons, don't use GPS services or might turn them off, or there's some issues, and you want to call the carrier and you want to know, is this load on time? Have you arrived? Are you being loaded? What's going on? We take all that information and we automatically update our customers' TMS. So it's kind of like your TMS is operating autonomously through the use of FleetWorks voice agents, our email agents, and our other sort of communication agents like text and WhatsApp.
What has been the biggest challenge in building the product itself?
Yeah. On the technology side, I think one thing that we've done well, which has been hard, has been being very diligent with our customers about offering them the customization, but whether self-serve or whether we do it for them, the customization to build AI agents in a way that really fits their business. I think every brokerage has their own bit of secret sauce and their own way of doing things. And so it was really hard up front to build a product that could support different types of negotiation, different phrasing, different ways of doing business. But I think we've gotten that, and I think we're continuing to invest there. But that's a really big thing for us, is not forcing brokers to fit to our process, but rather bringing a technology that lets brokers adapt it to how they want to do business, which is kind of a new way of technology. I think that's the other thing that AI sort of unlocks, is you don't have to build your team to fit what that tech provider tells you to do. We share best practices with our customers, but we let them kind of customize things to how they need to run the business.
And is that customization work done by your team of 7 technical people, or is their team that can go into the system and change things however they see fit?
It's both. Yeah, it really depends. And also it depends on their level of sophistication. Like some of our customers are really sophisticated. Their developers are directly connected to our developers on Slack, and we're talking every single day. Sometimes we offer that as a service to our customers too.
And why wouldn't a sophisticated brokerage, or a brokerage with a sophisticated technology team, why wouldn't they just build this themselves?
They could certainly try. They could try. What they will find is that it's really easy to stand up a proof of concept. Like they could build a voice AI agent in I don't know, maybe if they were really dedicated on it, let's say like 2 months. I think what they'll find is that the amount of UI that operators need to understand what the AI is doing, but then also actually all of the detailed nuances of how all these AI agents work together to actually complete a call, it's actually really, really hard to pull off. When you think about negotiation, when you think about sharing details of the load, when you communicate appointment time flexibility, all that infrastructure we've built. So could a C.H. Robinson build this? Absolutely. It would probably take them a couple of years to catch up to where we are. And at that point, I'm like, why not just get ROI today?
Yeah. Well, help me understand what you mean by the AI agents work together.
Yeah. It's a great question. This is like getting really nuanced into how we run our product. Without giving out too much of our secrets.
Sorry,
sauce.
I don't want you to give up your secrets,
Yeah.
but I want to understand kind of what you mean, because this is more me as a curious,
for sure,
non-technical person, and I'm sure my audience is curious about this stuff. Certainly not trying to give your trade secrets, but keep that in mind as you answer.
I'll share what I can. So basically, in order to do the things that we need done well, like whether it be a track and trace call, making decisions around what types of questions to ask in that call, making decisions around how to route calls, depending on the type of negotiation, the type of load. It's not just one AI. It actually could be dozens of AI, which from a carrier perspective, it doesn't sound like that. Carrier perspective, it's just they're talking to one AI the whole time. On our end, we're actually handing off between lots of different agents who are evaluating the outcomes of prior agents and making decisions on how to move forward. So that's not really like totally secret sauce. Our value is how we stitch those agents together. Our value is then how do we also, is actually really important for operators at brokerages to really understand what the AI is doing on their behalf and where they need to lean in as an operator, right? Because the AI can't do everything for you. But it can partner with you on negotiation, on vetting, and you can provide input to it. You can say, for example, a great example of how our customers partner with the AI live. So we're negotiating with the carrier. Let's say a customer marks a load as a hot load, right? You're like, I'm willing to take things above my max rate because this load's really important to me, or this shipper's really important to me. We'll send a Slack message or a Teams message to our customer, to the rep on file on that load, and we'll say, "Hey, Joey."
When you say we, you're talking about an AI agent is sending a Slack message.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going.
If it was we, man, we'd have to hire a lot more people to send Slack messages.
Just trying to understand.
Yeah.
Just trying to understand.
That's good. I was like, man, do we need to change our hiring plans? No, so our AI will send a Slack message to the operator, say, hey, hey Joey, we've got this carrier on the line. Here's the rate. Here's why we're sending you a message. The load is hot. Joey can then respond and say, take that rate, or hey, try to negotiate them down, or hey, ask them when and where they're empty. We can collect all that information. So that's kind of how we let individual operators at our companies kind of scale their impact a little bit more.
Got it. And when you're out selling to new potential prospects or customers, what are you selling as like the differentiator for why FleetWorks is the answer to them?
Yeah, so I think there's maybe two sales. Like there's like why should you just use FleetWorks in general, and then maybe why should you use us over any other AI agent company, right? So why FleetWorks in general? I think first of all, the carrier experience when talking to a brokerage can be amazing, but it can also without AI, it can be amazing, but it can also be really bad. I've called some of our customers their general carrier line saying, hey, press 1 to talk to the carrier sales team. And I've been on hold for like 3 minutes, right? Me as a carrier, like that's not a good experience. So why should you use FleetWorks? Well, number one,
that's a wildly low number to use as an example, because there's
3
definitely
minutes?
Examples where it's 30 minutes and no one ever picks up the phone. But keep going.
You're right. Maybe I'm being too generous.
I
You're
appreciate
right.
the modesty in that answer. I mean, I've talked on the show about abandonment rate and how brokers have, in some cases, an abandonment rate of up to 20%. And
that's super low.
In those cases,
20% is good.
Well, 20% is good. 20%. I mean, if we're talking about abandonment rate as the percentage of phone calls where a carrier hangs up because no one ever answers, I would think 3 minutes is pretty good relative to 20, 30, 40% of the calls just never being answered.
Yes, we've seen as high as 75% calls being missed. I'd say average wait time for a carrier based on our data is 2 minutes of wait time before the carrier just hangs up and just calls the next broker down the line, right?
Got it. Okay. Yep.
So we've certainly seen crazy wait times. Why should you use FleetWorks? Number one, we solve the wait time problem for you. Number two, we actually solve a massive data problem for you. When you're calling out to carriers or when you're taking inbound calls from carriers, your reps are too busy to take that call and in the same breath log into their TMS and log that offer or lack of offer in the system, right? Like everyone wants the reps to do that, but the reps just like don't have time. The reps are trying to do a lot with their day. And so you're losing huge amounts of data. So we help our customers increase data captured per lane anywhere from 2x to 10x on some of your hottest lanes. Like we have customers who in a given week, we might give them 100 offers on a lane. And that's actually a signal for them. We say, hey, go to a customer and get more freight there. And also you might want to think about what your carrier pay actually looks like on that lane, because there's clearly like a lot of demand that you're just like not tapping into. So we kind of help the carrier experience. We help the data piece. But the other thing is like, we also just help our customers become infinite in a way that like was never really possible. So what could you do as a brokerage if you could call every carrier and understand their preferences? What could you do as a brokerage if you were not rate limited by track and trace calls? What could you do as a brokerage if documents were automatically parsed? Like, what could you do if every SOP that you dreamed of was executed on time and the data was inputted back into the TMS? And I think it's really that level of possibility that has been like, that's been the most rewarding part for me is like, when I was in Chicago 2 weeks ago, I was mostly talking with a lot of our current customers. And I think the common theme was like, FleetWorks does carrier sales, FleetWorks does track and trace for us. How else can we deploy the technologies? I think we're in just like, I feel like a very rare and frankly, a very humbling position where you know this, when your customers are coming to you and asking how else can I use your product, like that's a really, I think, great place to be, because the team works hard, right? And we work, and it's gratifying that when we work hard, customers come to us and say, you've earned our trust, and like, let's go deeper. But it's also a great opportunity for the business, right? Because as we do more for our customers, and the relationship really up levels, and they're like, the ROI from FleetWorks is so obvious that like I don't even have to necessarily go out and do another business case. Like for me, it's just like a no-brainer of I want to use FleetWorks as much as I can, basically.
What does the customer base look like today? How many brokerages are you in with?
Yep.
How big is it?
Yeah. We're millions of dollars in revenue. We have a few dozen brokerages, some big logos that I cannot share right now. But I would say that like basically every brokerage of meaningful scale is either using us or considering using us. And so it's been awesome. It's been really fun.
That's impressive. I mean, millions is a big number for the time that you all have been in business, and certainly must feel validating.
For sure.
Where do you see the product is like fully baked, and where do you see there's like more room to develop?
Yeah. The product is not fully baked anywhere. Which is a weird answer because we're selling this product. I think the product works really well, but it's an insane problem to have as a former product person. The prioritization that we have to do is really interesting and exciting, because like I just think there's improvements everywhere. Like for example, outbound calling, like how to get just more accurate on outbound calling, or looping in the operators, or capturing appointment time flexibility. Like I just think what a broker can do, or what a brokerage does, is so complex that I just still feel like we're in the second inning. I think the first inning was, does this thing work? I think the second inning was, can you get more nuance? I think we're in the bottom of the second. We're maybe getting to the third inning, where I just think there's vectors of improvement on every possible channel. And I'm just really excited, particularly about helping our customers get smarter about their networks. Like that's really, I think the best brokerages are great at network management. And we want to help all of our customers get there.
So I definitely see, I mean, the idea that your commentary around help you be infinite, I don't know why I started like envisioning Tony Stark and like Marvel as you said that, or Thanos. I don't know, but
hopefully not Thanos.
I see what you're talking about, and I see how much data you can collect using this, and how much more reach you can have using tools like this. And I guess what I'm curious of a number of things. Let's start with the competitive landscape. So, I've asked pretty much every AI company on here a question of this nature. So I'm sure you're not surprised to hear it. But how do you think about the competitive landscape? You've got at least one major competitor in Happy Robot that just raised, I think, $15 million or something like that, and an $85 million valuation, which is huge. Congrats to them. You've got, I just interviewed Dave Bell, who has Clone Ops. I think that might have been what inspired you to message me, like, yo, can I get on the show? Like,
yeah.
And, in that example, that's a brand new company, hasn't launched their product. I think they're launching their product soon. And it's, a guy with like 30 years of industry experience and a lot of success. And then I'm sure there are more coming that I'm not aware of. So how do you think about the competitive landscape, and like how does the competitive landscape impact your decision making for how you approach the business and how you approach growth, fundraising, hiring, and such?
Yep. You're absolutely right. I think any opportunity that is worth chasing is going to bring, I think, great competition. I wish I could share more on our fundraising, but we're not public about that just yet. But more to come soon. I think overall, like, this is a very attractive market. The data that we gather, the clear ROI that we demonstrate for customers is a clear signal to both us and to competitors that, hey, this is a market, we should go chase it. Here's why our customers choose us over our competition. Number one, I think our really intense focus on the carrier relationship, and how that broker can build, nurture, and grow that relationship with carriers has been critical for our business. So I mentioned this earlier, but everything we do and everything we did at Uber Freight and everything we do here at FleetWorks is really carrier first and carrier centric. So that's kind of why customers tend to choose us, is because we're not just a voice AI company. We don't believe in spamming carriers. We believe in helping our customers actually like grow meaningful relationships and grow meaningful networks. So that's really our main goal. There's a bunch of AI companies. I think there's only, to your point, I think 2 that actually have real working products publicly. And I think our speed of execution just continues to be just absolutely killer. I mentioned this earlier. Like, we have 7 technical folks. They're all former founders, which means like, yes, we have 7 people, but technically those are actually like 20 or 30 people worth of work. And so our ability to attract great talent continues to be like my number one priority as CEO. The reason we can attract that talent is because we started from a really high base, and then we can pay well above market because we only hire top 1% talent. So instead of hiring 2 people who are good, we're just going to pay a top person like 50 to 75% more. And so our salary ranges are going to be competing with like the big tech companies because we can afford to do that. Folks are really attracted to us because we're already profitable. In a really short amount of time, we've built up enough customer trust. And I think ultimately the thing that for me that really sticks out is, again, all of our customers come to us and say, how else can I use FleetWorks? Like, it's that proactive outreach that over every single day, and for sure, like the competition is intense, but every single day, the fact that our current customers are saying, how can I use FleetWorks more? Why is this working the way it does? And basically just saying, hey, we want to spend more with you. We want to grow with you. I feel really good about that direction, but it's early days.
Yeah. I mean, I commend I'm a big believer in just following the customer. And if the customer is giving you feedback that your team's doing a great job and that they want to see more from you, then you figure out how to give them more. And it's part of why I'm curious. I have 2 questions here, but one is around, it's interesting that you talked about the hiring process and how you're able to pay more than the average company would be, but you're having less people. And this ties into the fundraising conversation a little bit, but like, given how intense the competition can be and how, there's certainty that more is coming, is there not a temptation to go raise a lot of capital and turn 7 really strong technical people into 25 really strong technical people, and then you can go faster and bigger and more expansive and get your arms around the industry faster, so it's harder? Like, you have maybe a deeper moat at that point. Like, how do you think about the idea of, what you're doing versus something more aggressive?
Yeah. More to share on fundraising soon. Yeah.
Okay. That's the whole answer?
That's the whole answer.
Okay. All right. Then let me ask you a different question then. How do you contemplate navigating pricing in an environment where more competition is coming, and knowing that there's risk that whatever, call it whatever dollars per call or per minute you're charging, or cents per minute or cents per call, someone may come in and offer a cheaper number. Like, how do you navigate that kind of idea as you build out a product like this?
That is a great question. We spend a lot of time thinking about that as a company. So first of all, we've actually run into we've already heard that some folks are trying to give away this product for free. I'm not exactly sure who. To me, that doesn't really make sense. I think the folks that we tend to partner with, they understand that this is like they're putting the trust of their business in our hands, right? Like we are their front of house, and that inherently has value to it. And our customers, like the way that we think about our revenue is our customers investing in us. Like they're giving us the resources to go out and hire more people and support their business and build like really deep products that support the business. As we kind of think about moats, there are a few things, and I'm thinking about what I want to share publicly versus not. But overall, I think there's a bunch of moats in this business. We have not seen, no one has switched away from us and switched to our competitors. Now, it's possible come year-end renewal time, like customers might evaluate. What we do with our customers is our product is so deeply intertwined with how they do business and how they cover their freight and how they think about managing their freight, that to pull us out is technically possible. Like people switch their TMSs sometimes. I don't think anyone has ever pulled out their TMS and said, wow, that was like a great experience and incredibly easy and not painful. Like pulling FleetWorks out is painful because like we're doing the job of some of your people. And so, getting rid of us would be like pulling out dozens of carrier reps, like, or if you're a large brokerage, hundreds of carrier reps, and then saying, okay, I'm going to bring on a new provider, or I'm going to go hire people to fill that gap. And as we find that our customers build processes around the data and the execution that we help them with, we find that customers tend to just be really happy. And I think my promise always to my customers is, hey, we're always going to price fairly. Like, we're going to price fairly. If we feel like if we actually feel like there's an opportunity to lower prices for you, we may do that. And ultimately, like, the ROI that we demonstrate for customers is kind of a no-brainer. So if someone comes in for 1 penny cheaper a minute or 10 cents per load cheaper, our competition cannot provide a 10x better product. So
yeah,
that's kind of how we think about it.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm curious, what are, if the product is able to do the job of dozens, or in some cases at scaled brokerages, hundreds of carrier reps.
Yep.
What does the shift look like within the company when they deploy FleetWorks? If I'm a carrier rep, am I worried for my job when FleetWorks gets installed, or is my job just fundamentally changing into something completely different? Help me understand what that looks like.
Yeah. It's a good question, and I think it's really good timing given where the market is. So like, it's no secret, like, market's terrible. Like, everyone, I think every brokerage had to make, or a lot of brokerages had to make pretty deep cuts, a year or two ago. Feels like consensus is we kind of hit the rock bottom. Things are coming back up. I think this is a great time to invest in a platform like ours, because you bring us on and suddenly your hiring plans change. It's not really about firing people. It tends to be, we have seen people change workforces, but I think those are companies who just felt like they were really overstaffed anyway. For most of our customers, it's more like, hey, we like our people and we've trained them up really well, and we don't want to go through the pain of training from scratch more people. So let's use our existing people. Let's shift them to actually doing more meaningful work. Like, instead of my carrier reps spending 25% of their day doing track and trace, 25% handling call-ins off of postings, 25% of their day, shooting the shit, and 25% of their day doing outbound calls and outbound emails and building relationships. Let's go more 25% of the day shooting the shit, 75% of the day building relationships, right? And so that's the calculus that a lot of our customers are making.
And how does, like, you mentioned that you want to be very carrier centric, and help develop or evolve the relationship between the broker and the carrier. It just naturally feels like a product like this detracts from the relationship, right? It theoretically removes a lot of the human conversation that has to happen in a load booking process. So help me understand how the relationship can actually be improved through a product like this.
Yeah. I love this question because it's so foundational to what we do. I think when we started, like I said, there were doubts like, are carriers even okay with this process, right? And I think fortunately we proved that they are, right? And if we didn't, we wouldn't even have a business. The way I think about how AI empowers relationships is I think when I built relationships with carriers, it's a two-part, three-part process. I think number one is the data that you collect about the carrier, where they like to run, what their equipment type is. Number two is the execution on that data. And then number three, and what I mean by execution on the data is like you actually tender the load to the carrier when the load matches.
You have to give them business.
Yeah, you have to give them freight.
You understand their needs and wants.
Yeah.
That's step one.
Yeah.
Step two of the relationship is actually like executing an order together, leveraging the information they've given you. I'm with you. Keep going.
And part three is, what's your dog's name? What's your wife's name? What's your kid's name? What's your favorite sports team? Like, I think AI can do number three. My general approach is, I think it's funny, but I don't really want to invest in it. My approach is AI can definitely do number two really well. So we can definitely do number two, and we can definitely do number one. So we can help you collect data, or we can be a repository for your data, and we can consistently be that execution layer that helps you execute on the data that you collect. And so, Andrew, if you're going back to the brokerage floor and you're working at Ally Logistics or Capstone Logistics or any of our customers, I think your role changes. Like, I think your job is to develop carriers and put that data into FleetWorks to help you make more money. Like, we're going to help you make more money as a carrier rep because we're going to help you book a lot more consistently with owned carriers. And then what you tell the carrier is, hey man, I'm going to have an AI reach out to you, but like you're in the routing guide, you're number one in the routing guide. So you're always going to get this load before we put it out on the open market. And carriers appreciate that. Like me as a carrier rep, I would sometimes forget to tender that load to the carrier if it was like an informal agreement, right? Because I had just a lot of things going on. And so we consistently help our carriers do that. But if we free up the carrier rep's time to say, hey, Joey, like if you ever need me, I will always be here. And my time is more available now because I'm using AI to help me book freight. So I'm always there for you, but AI is going to be my assistant. And you can always tell the AI, connect me to Andrew. And we always will.
So let me just say, hearing that kind of explanation, the three parts, I am 100% sold that if the technology can do as it's intended to, this is a home run solution to evolve a carrier rep's time. And by evolve, I mean make it more efficient and allow you to do more. I've spent years as a carrier rep, and I've had some really strong relationships with owner operators, and I still to this day can call a number of them, and I have their numbers memorized, and they would do what I asked of them if I needed them, and I would do what they asked of me, and that was a product of just relationships built over time. But that was like a grit relationship. That was me calling them all the time, understanding their lanes, memorizing it. A million note cards, and I had as good a TMS as anything at Bazooka, at Coyote, and I could have logged it, but my process, it was just easier to do the notes. As I think about this, one, the ability to get seemingly infinite information from carriers on where their trucks are going to be, what lanes they just got from new customers that they need backhauls for, whatever. I mean, that there's clear value in being able to call more carriers and get more information. Housing that information as a repository and then using it to make more decisions. I mean, that's another big win. And the ability to, again, infinitize it, that's not a word, but like to make it infinite, to make it so you never miss the calls. There is so much data that is missed from brokers because, well, like you said, the abandonment rate can be up to 70%. I've seen 20, 25, 30, whatever it is. It's a big number. It's a meaningful number that if you can replace a missed call with an answered call, information provided and taken in and then saved and used to make better decisions, that's another home run. The third piece is thinking about the actual carrier rep, and that's where I'm putting myself back in the shoes that I sat in 15 years ago and recognizing that there's so much time I spent gathering the information. And if I just had the information in front of me and I could spend my whole day calling the right people who I already knew what their information was, and my job was solely to buoy them up or become their friend, whether it was a man or woman, it didn't matter. And, there's so much value to that. And I see how there are certain things, like, for example, I remember one of my carriers, Peter Achukwu and his wife, Catherine. They used to do a lot of local Southeast Coca-Cola stuff for me. They were based in Marietta, Georgia, and they would have to go to the Coca-Cola Atlanta facility. And I've talked about this facility before. He hated the woman who ran the facility. He said she was an asshole and was a real pain in the butt. And we used to always put him on loads that the appointment had already been missed. Like, AI can get me to the point of matching him to the load and letting me know that I should call him and convince him to take the load. Because that's what it was at that point, was like, I knew he didn't like the load. I had to lean on our friendship to make that happen. And I don't want AI talking to him about like, oh, the lady at the facility. Like, he and I can have that. That's the personal element to the conversation, is around the nuance of the load. That's not exactly, I mean, you could call it a data point, but it's something that feels a little bit different that AI wouldn't be involved in, is like the idea that there's a person there that's a pain in the ass, or that you're going to be waiting a long time. That's where I want to talk to a person who has compassion. So I can have compassion for the fact that Peter would have to wait 6 hours to get loaded. And our conversation is going to be a lot more productive if I'm understanding what he needs for that versus an AI. I just don't think that's where that plays. So yeah, this is my, I guess, my stamp of approval. I don't know. I was trying to think of the word. Whatever, of the idea. Because my brother and I at one point were arguing about this on Twitter or something, where he made the age-old argument of, anytime I call an airline or the bank and a robot picks up, I'm yelling, agent, wanting to talk to a person. And I've been there. I've been that person. I've frustratingly said agent over and over again until they put an actual person on the phone. But I think there's proof in the pudding. I mean, how many phone calls on a daily basis, or just give me a number of phone calls that have successfully been executed between FleetWorks and carriers, even if it's not exact, it's a number that represents that I believe the market is open to this.
I mean, millions.
Exactly. It's millions. So if millions of calls have taken place where a driver was okay with the voice AI on the other end, that's a large enough sample size for us to say that carriers in general are going to be open to this. And therefore, with the type of return it has, it's coming. It's coming to every brokerage near you. So I guess I'll ask a question now, given I just kind of went on a little rant there. What do you see as the long-term impact? So let's say I'm Joe's Trucking. I've got 10 trucks. I'm based in Nampa, Idaho, and every September, my phone starts ringing off the hook from anybody who's taking onion or potato loads out of the Northwest, and they're seeing if I'll come help them with my 10 reefers. But once every broker has either FleetWorks or your competitors, and they all have set up this outbound data collection process, am I not getting a phone call 400 times a day by people wanting to talk to me?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think there is danger of that. 100%. 100%. Couple thoughts there. I do think, well, first of all, actually, I want to go back to something you said before. So it sucks when I call, because I actually like doing things over the phone. Like I like calling support on the phone. And it's so frustrating as someone who has built like a pretty successful voice AI company that I still run into like old school, like press 1 if you want to talk to bookings. Like I'm just like, God, like can you guys just use this technology so that I can get my job done? Like it sucks because I was like, another startup needs to come in and sell to Comcast and United and all those guys. So that's my rant. But to get to your question, I think your phone could be ringing off the hook. This is our job at FleetWorks, and why I'm really emphasizing being carrier first. It's our job to understand, number one, how does that carrier like to be contacted? So they might not want a phone call. They might want an email. They might want a text message. So we want to be wherever that carrier wants to be. Beyond that, I do think we might move to a world of carriers being more platform, more like, I don't even know what the term is, like platformized. Like I think like Convoy has obviously built like their platform. Uber Freight's got their platform. I don't want to open that can of worms. I think you had like the LinkedIn post of the century last year when Uber came out with that. But there's all these carrier platforms, and I think like because we help our customers book so much freight, carriers may come to us and we may help them. We may help them book freight easier without a phone call.
So you're saying there's a world where your own business drives away the phone calls that are happening in the business? I mean, I don't mean to say it like that, but there's a chance that you have so many calls that you're creating for customers that you now need to create a new solution to help carriers get away from the calls.
Quite possible. Yeah.
Or you have to create the same agent to take the calls on behalf of the carriers.
Totally. Yeah. The problem is that carriers are they don't have, like small carriers don't really have a platform today. Like, and that's why the phone calls are so powerful, is because like, that's the only way to reach the carrier. So I think more to come on that. I also think that frankly, like the government does need to catch up to this in a way. Like the laws that govern AI phone calls were written in the 90s when robocalling became a problem. I think those laws are like pretty antiquated, obviously, because like those calls were literally spam calls. But like you could have AI spam, but I don't think we're spamming. Like I think we're trying to do business, and I think the government needs to create either industry frameworks or universal frameworks to regulate this. Because otherwise, I think you could certainly have bad actors who are not carrier first, and who are kind of unscrupulous and who are going to just be, literally downloading the FMCSA database and just clicking call on 300,000 active carriers, right?
Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't someone do that? You could create an interesting business if you just created what you've created with your voice AI agent. Yep. And then you just go collect all the data from the carriers. Yeah. I mean, it'd be messy, but that would be interestingly valuable data. And I'll use that as a segue to a question. Is there any avenue for you to take the data that you're collecting and leverage it in a way that is... So I interviewed... Wait, let me make sure this is public. Yeah, it is. It is. Part of the green screens strategy is kind of helping all the small brokers that they partner with aggregate their data so that they get they have a small piece of a big pie, but the pie gets bigger every time there's a new provider who signs up, and therefore the data gets better because they're all putting data in and they're all being able to leverage that data to get better pricing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get what I'm saying? Is there an avenue for, if I'm Ally Logistics and I have, call it 1,000 calls a day that FleetWorks is doing for me, I'm only as powerful as the data that comes from 1,000 calls. But if I'm Ally and I'm part of a network of 30 FleetWorks customers, that 1,000 calls becomes 100,000 calls a day. Is there an avenue for all of that data to be leveraged by all the customers?
I think there are opportunities. Yeah. How do you think about it? Because like I think data sharing in this industry is both like common practice, but also maybe a little taboo. So I'm curious, like, how do you think about that, and what data should be shared versus should not be shared?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, which is kind of why I asked it. But I definitely think that there are two trains of thought, or maybe there's more than two trains of thought. I think that a lot of brokers think their carrier capacity is their differentiator, and the data on their carrier sourcing is a differentiator. And I get why your network should be a differentiator. There's not a ton of other options for differentiation. There are a few, but not a ton. How you run your business, the rules you use to govern how you execute for customers, things like that, how you engage your employees. But that's not the point of the conversation. So I could see why a broker would say, absolutely not. Don't share my data with anyone else. That's mine. And I want to use it for myself. But alternatively, especially on the smaller broker side, you want to leverage whatever piece of information you can get, and you can't compete with the C.H. Robinsons on the data front. So I could see why they'd be more open to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's on us to come up with the right rules of data sharing. Certainly, like we've got some mega customers, and they've expressed concerns, I think very valid, about, hey, I don't want my data being shared with a brokerage who does 50 loads a day, right? Because they're getting more value from the data than we're getting from their data. On the flip side,
Sure.
I think it's a good point. On the flip side, Uber Freight, to your point, has spent hundreds of millions, and if we count Transplace in the equation, billions of dollars building this business. They still pay DAT a lot of money for access to their data, a lot of money. And so clearly, even Uber Freight, who, despite all their investment, has gotten to 1.5% of the brokerage market, roughly. Despite all their investment, still not a market mover. Could they benefit from 40 other brokerages lumped together under one tool? I think maybe. We'll have to prove it with them that when they access our data, they can price more accurately and better. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about it. I certainly think there's a lot of openness from, I would call the more like small midsize, like the 100 to 300 million brokerage. They understand that, hey, like, our secret sauce is kind of like, it's like our sales team and how we service our customers. And at the end of the day, like, our carrier network is tiny compared to the overall market. So if they can use FleetWorks to tap into a broader data pool, I see that as like a win-win.
Is that an offering today, though? Are they able to tap into a larger pool?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Yeah.
Still looking at it. Okay.
Exactly.
And when you think about the product today, everything is centered on voice, right? I mean, are you thinking about doing some of the other stuff to compete with, like, the, just to speak to my former guests, like the Vumas and the drum kits of the world?
Our AI is already talking to tens of thousands of carriers per day outside of voice. So we're already executing on our vision of meeting carriers where they are. Like, email is going to be a big channel, text, WhatsApp. Those are all really common channels for carrier communication. Voice is obviously just like a slam dunk, and it's going really well. And that's still why a lot of customers come to us. But all those products are alive and well.
But in terms of, that's a good point. But okay, so you mentioned all carrier facing, though. some of the stuff that the Vuma and Drumkit guys are doing are focused more on the customer side of the house. Are you dabbling in the customer side of the house, or everything is still carrier centric and planning to stay carrier centric, or TBD? Maybe fundraising. Who knows?
Sure. I love fundraising, as you know, as my mysterious answer. Look, I mean, I think here's the thing that I will say about it is like, first of all, we see our core mission as connecting carriers and brokers. If talking to customers or engaging with customers enables better outcomes for coverage and carriers, and more economic opportunity for carriers, we'll absolutely go that direction. Given how nimble and sort of well executed our team is so far, I could see us going into that path. Like, I guess what we're calling more like agentic workflows and like building sort of like operational processes using or rebuilding processes using AI. Absolutely. Like I said, I think we're in the bottom of the second in terms of like how do brokers connect with carriers. And so I would say if a customer wants us to do email quoting automation for them in February 2025, I would say you should 100% go with Vuma. But if you want the best product that enables you to cover your freight cheaper than a human, both from an efficiency standpoint and a gross margin standpoint, you should go with us. That's kind of a no-brainer.
Is it an or it could be an and?
It can for sure be an and. We have many customers that use Vuma for some of their core products, and they use us for our core products.
Okay, got it. What's been the most challenging element to selling technology into freight brokers?
Probably the number one right now is just how tough the market is. I think you have a lot of brokers who are on tech pause as they're like, we need to see when this market comes back. And to your point, it's not a question of it's not a question of if, but rather a question of when. So I think it's a timing thing. But look, I'm really happy about the team's process and progress, despite the fact we're in like the worst freight recession, or coming out of the worst freight recession, like, you know, in recent memory. That's a tough part. I think we're also very fortunate that we're coming in. If we were selling this product 10 years ago, I think a lot of the core technologies, like particularly the TMSs, were not originally built to support integrations of this magnitude and of this speed. So we're very fortunate that the TMSs have the capability now to support a product like ours. And so I'll actually kind of, as kind of like a piggyback on that, I think people have been really burned by bad technology in this industry. Like we come to people and they're like, how do I know what you're saying is true? Like, how do I know I'm going to get the ROI? And I'm like, look, man, just try it. Like, we could integrate. Like, I love the story of LGI, and if you know Brandon Bay there, he's a true homie. Brandon was very public that we, from signing to when we handled their first call from them, so we did the whole integration and operational process and launch in 22 hours. And so our goal is to really elevate the bar on what a tech vendor can do in this space. So that's the hard part, is actually we're selling against, I think, the missteps of a lot of companies who came before us. But, you know, I think that just comes down to having a great team, building customer trust, and continuing to just rebuild customer trust over and over.
Yeah, great answer. All right, last two questions for you. And they're kind of go hand in hand, both sides of the same coin. What would you say is the number one thing a happy customer is saying about FleetWorks? Like, what are they raving about? What do they love?
Number one, they're like, God damn, this thing works. That's the first thing. Number two, I think, is going to be just like communication and support. So we set up Slack channels or team channels with all of our customers, and we're just continuing to win on how we communicate with our customers, how quickly we can prioritize their work, and how we can build around their process. So the product works. The support is great. You have access to the whole team whenever you join with us. And then number three, I think the speed of new product ads. I think a lot of people, going back to, prior vendors, like a vendor does one thing for you, right? And like their product doesn't evolve. To be honest, I'm still catching up on like I'm communicating to our customers all the new things that we're bringing to the table for them. And so I think a lot of customers are like, God damn, like, whether we onboarded with you 3 months ago or we had our first conversation 3 months ago, I need to tell them, hey, I need to run a new demo with you because what I'm going to show you now is different than when you first talked to me, back in September, October. So yeah, it's going to be the product works, the customer support, and just like the speed of new build.
Smart way to ask for one thing, give me three, because it gives you a chance to brag about the business a little bit.
Yeah.
Because now you got to answer the hard question, which is, what's the number one thing that customers are complaining about or frustrated about?
What is the number one thing?
And you don't have to give me three here. You can just pick one.
I mean, thank you for limiting it. I could probably give you a few, but I think we could do a better job at exposing to customers the rules that they have built in our system or that we're building in our system for them. So they might ask, hey, why is the AI doing this? The team jumps in and we're like, oh yeah, it's because you asked us to do that 2 months ago. And they're like, oh, that makes sense. Or they're like, oh, let's change that. We don't want that rule anymore. So I think we need to continue to kind of expose more of that, whether it be customization or whether it be rule making to our customers. But it's great that we're now frankly at the point where I would say like 95% of customer outreach is like the product is working as expected. We just didn't do a great job at exposing that and continuously communicating it to you.
It's a funny answer, but I actually understand it wholeheartedly. As someone who's run a brokerage and understands how quickly we change our minds about things and how fast-paced things are and how easy it is to forget you made that rule a month ago and now you want to change it because some new element has shown up that's costing you money or time or energy, whatever it may be. So I actually understand that. So
yeah. We go super deep with these guys, right? So like their process is our process.
Awesome. Well, I'll give you one more.
All right.
You've been a founder now or CEO of this business for a year and a half, which can be a long time in freight CEO world. It certainly can feel like a long time. For other budding entrepreneurs wanting to get into the freight tech space, what advice do you have?
Getting into freight tech. Number one advice, come work with us. Like, I don't think you're going to work with smarter, kinder, more hardworking people than the people at FleetWorks. And if you're not going to work with us, then you should go work for another freight tech company. One that's really high growth, one that's small. I think there's so many people that come into the business and they think they understand it, and then they build a product. They maybe get to a few $100K or $1 million ARR, and they just dead hit a wall because they don't understand how complex this space is, how nuanced it is. So I think if you've never been in the space, joining a company in the space for a year or two to actually really learn it is powerful. I think if you have been in the space, the number one thing that you should do is talk to your prospective customers or talk to the stakeholders that your business is gonna affect. I think if you take that month to do respectful, tailored outreach on LinkedIn, like if you DM someone on LinkedIn, not like a blast, but you say, hey man, like I see you do this, I'm doing this, I would really love to talk with you for 15 minutes, or can I just shoot you an email with 2 or 3 questions? I think something like that can go a long way. That's why we like, going back to us, we don't do cold outreach. We do very tailored outreach. We do very personalized approach because people in the space are blown up by technology. And if you're going to build technology in the space, you have to be very relationship oriented and be very respectful, or join FleetWorks and we'll just put you in front of 20 customers like within the first like 3 weeks.
All right. I'll take that answer. Any final thoughts before we call it? I appreciate how honest and transparent you've been about the business. It's a cool story. It's a cool business, and seems like one you've got a lot of traction with.
No, thank you for having me. I mean, look, it's an exciting space. I think it's cool to see people. It's cool to really like have been part of this journey from the very beginning, not just this company, but also like how this technology is impacting the space, because we're seeing their narrative really evolve over the last 2 years. So yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to seeing you at some show at some point.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, man.
Cool, man.
To our listeners, that's all we got. Have a nice week.
Thank you, everyone.